So today we're going to dig into something that honestly applies to way more than just a courtroom, that critical and, let's be real, often scary step of testing your big ideas. We're going to see why, when the stakes are really high, the first people to hear your story should absolutely never be the ones deciding its fate. Okay, to get us started, let me tell you a story that just perfectly captures this whole problem. This quote you see, it's from a real verdict right in a real courtroom. It comes from the experience of a veteran trial lawyer, Greg Cusimano, and he had a case that he was positive he was going to win. In fact, pretty much everyone was sure he was going to win. I mean, we're talking about a case where the judge himself predicted it would shatter every damages record in the county, maybe even the entire state. The facts were solid, the client was incredibly sympathetic, and the trial itself, well, in Cusimano's own words, it had gone beautifully. And this wasn't just, wishful thinking. This was what all the experts in the room believed. And get this, the confidence was just off the charts. The lawyer on the other side was so convinced he was about to get hit with a massive, multi-million-dollar verdict that he was already dreading the playful humiliation he'd have to face from his partners. Apparently, they had this tradition where the loser of a huge case had to wear a toilet seat around their neck. No joke. And then that verdict came in. The jury says, yep, the plaintiff is right. But damages? Zero. A big, fat nothing. The courtroom was just stunned into silence. I mean, the judge himself was so confused he actually walked into the jury room and asked them, hey, did you guys make a mistake? They hadn't. So this left everyone with one giant, baffling question. How on earth could a perfect, unlosable case fail this badly? So what's going on here? Well, this story isn't just some weird fluke. It actually gets to the heart of a really deep human tendency we all have. We resist testing our own ideas, especially when we feel like we've got it all figured out. And the source material for this explainer really breaks down why so many experts, not just lawyers, fall right into this trap. Well, a socio-trial expert, Professor Brandon Blankenship, has looked into this, and he says it really boils down to three big psychological roadblocks. First, just simple unawareness. You just don't know you have a blind spot. Second, good old-fashioned hubris, thinking you've already got all the answers. And third, you're just too invested, emotionally, financially, in the story you've already created. Let's take a quick look at each one. A lot of really successful people, they have a formula, right? What worked for me before is going to work for me again. But here's the thing, the world changes. Audiences change. Jurors change. These are the folks who, after a shocking loss, are left scratching their heads saying something like, I have no earthly idea why I lost. The case tried beautifully. They're completely blind to the fact that the game has changed right under their noses. And then there's reason number two. Pure hubris. And this quote, wow, it is a perfect example of how dangerous that can be. It's from a political strategist talking about a candidate who just flat out refused to do any polling. He was so sure he knew what the voters wanted. Well, that was the last election he was ever in. Hubris is that little voice in your head whispering, don't bother asking, you already know. And the last one, this one is really tough. It's the investment trap. See, by the time you're ready to present your big idea, you've poured in hundreds of hours, your money, your reputation, just so much emotional energy. Your story has become your baby. The thought that this thing you've created might be seriously flawed, that's not just a strategic setback, it feels like a personal attack. And so we avoid any information that might deliver that painful news. Okay, so if those are the traps, how do you get out? Well, the solution is actually pretty simple, and it's the same logic you'd use for any other huge investment. You have to inspect it before you buy in. You got to do your due diligence. This is probably the best way to think about it, and it comes straight from the source material. Imagine you find this gorgeous old Victorian house. It looks perfect, right? Great bones, tons of character. But would you ever sign that contract without hiring an inspector to check for, a cracked foundation or a massive termite problem? Of course not. Your story is that beautiful house, and a focus group, that's your inspector. So, when you lay it out like this, the choice becomes just incredibly clear. On one hand, if the jury is your first audience, you're making a high-stakes, all-or-nothing gamble. The verdict is final, the risk of failure is huge. But if a focus group is your first audience, it's a learning opportunity. The feedback isn't the end of the story, it's the fuel to make it better. You get a chance to fix things, to improve, and to turn that high risk into a really high reward. Okay, so let's make this real. Let's look at an actual case study from Boston that shows just how powerful this process can be. It involves a traumatic brain injury, and on the surface, it looked like a really, really tough case for the person who got hurt. But testing completely changed the game. All right, so the first version of the story, man, it was a mess. It basically sounded like your average run-of-the-mill bar fight. There was drinking, an argument over a bar stool, friends getting involved, and it wasn't even clear who threw the first punch. You can just imagine a jury hearing that and thinking, well, you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. He kind of brought it on himself. That is a losing story, plain and simple. But here's the brilliant part. The lawyers took this messy story and they tested it. They put it in front of focus groups. And by listening really carefully to why the test jurors were blaming their client, they had a huge aha moment. They were telling the wrong story. This case wasn't about a bar stool. It was about the bar's total failure to keep its customers safe. And once they had this new frame, this new story, they went looking for new evidence to back it up. And wow, did they find it. They discovered the manager knew things were getting tense. In fact, he'd even said to the group that came in, "You aren't here to start any trouble, are you?" They found security footage of the bouncers and staff running outside, not to stop the fight, but to watch it like it was a movie. And they proved the bar had zero safety procedures. Suddenly, the story wasn't about a bad choice by a patron, it was about the complete negligence of a business. And the result? Just look at this. It's absolutely stunning. Because they took the time to test and rebuild their story, the real jury put a staggering 90% of the blame squarely on the bar. The plaintiff, the guy who could have easily been blamed for the whole thing, was found only 5% at fault. That is the power of testing your story. So this all leads to what I think is the most important lesson in this whole thing. It's a total mindset shift about what the goal of a test run really is. And trust me, it's probably not what you think. And here it is. This is a really tough idea for smart, competitive people to swallow. The whole point of a focus group isn't to win. It's not to get a pat on the back or hear how great your story is. The purpose is to learn. You run it to find every single weakness, every crack in the foundation. In fact, the source material argues you learn way, way more when you lose in a focus group than when you win. And this really sums it all up, right? Losing in a safe place, a controlled environment, that's a gift. It shows you all the fatal flaws, the confusing parts, the hidden biases your story kicks up, all while you still have a chance to do something about it. A loss in a focus group is basically the blueprint for how to win when it actually matters. And that's really the big question for all of us, isn't it? It doesn't matter if you're a lawyer preparing a case, an entrepreneur pitching a new company, or even just getting ready for a really important conversation in your own life. What's the one big idea you have that you really ought to test before it truly counts? Because the smartest thing you can possibly do is find a few trusted people, make your case, and then ask them to tear it apart. Because finding the flaws is the very first step to making it flawless.